Thank you so much for those kind words. At the big, and I'm grateful to the Korean Society for giving me this opportunity, and especially to my friend, Dr. Professor Lee. When I got this topic, I thought maybe I'm getting too old, and therefore Dr. Lee wants me to speak on different eras in liver transplantation. Because, the ERAS protocol is generally not applicable in liver transplantation because all we want is if the patient and the donor should be well rather than quick discharge from the hospital. So I started doing some research into this and I actually realized that there's a lot of work has been done in ERAS protocol in liver transplantation. So, in the course of my talk, I'll give you some definitions, scope of my talk, key principles in this ERAS protocol, teamwork, preoperative, perioperative, and whether we can adapt them to sick recipients. You saw a wonderful talk on ACLF3 by a colleague from Korea. And what is the ILTS position on the ERAS guidelines and what has been our own experience, and in the end, give you a summary. So, the enhanced recovery after surgery is a multimodal perioperative care pathway designed to achieve quick recovery for patients undergoing major surgery. I first was introduced in 1997 by CareLat for colorectal surgery. So, it clearly shortens the average hospital length of stay, reduces complications and expenses, therefore. Anesthesia management is crucial, and there's no doubt that it aids in quick recovery. However, as far as liver transplantation is concerned, the data is limited as many patients are extremely sick prior to transplantation. They'd be crazy to go through transplantation if they're not really unwell. Allocation is preferential in the US is to high MEL score. And now I hear that in Korea also a little bit of allocation is happening on the Korean MEL score, making them do sick patients as never before. Patients with acute or chronic liver failure often bedbound in the ICU. Nevertheless, there have been some studies that have suggested decrease in hospital stay with the ERAS protocol. I think the World Journal of Transplant in July 2022, and in another in August 2023, Guangmin Li and all have published the application of enhanced recovery after surgery. So, what are the key principles? And these are important. Counseling. Forewarned is forearmed. And therefore, obviously, if they know what to expect, they recover better. Otherwise, they're worried that something majorly wrong has happened to them. Nutritional support in recipients. We tend in hospitals, particularly in our hospital, patients sometimes don't get appointments for scanning in time and they kept fasting for long periods of time. And also in surgery, sometimes the theater is delayed and they remain sort of starved for a long time. So obviously, this is something that can be easily achieved. Use of short-acting anesthetic agents and multimodal analgesic regimen. And these are things that can easily be incorporated in our transplant practice. Perioperative factors are important in the ERAS protocol, and technical precision and hemostasis. Recently, there's been a lot of emphasis on incision, suggesting that incision is perhaps more important than precision in affecting outcome. There must be an effective strategy for prevention of small for size syndrome, which is the biggest bugbear of living donor liver transplantation, and therefore also will prevent the application of ERAS protocol. Early extubation, it is quite often doable with liberal use of opiates. Early mobilization, nutrition, drain removal, maintenance of blood sugars. But far more important is audit, and I'll come to that in a bit. So at our Center for the ERAS protocol, we've looked at that the biggest threat to the ERAS protocol is small for size syndrome. And therefore, that must be dealt with. Whatever strategy you adopt within your own center, you may want to use a bigger liver or you want to use whatever, or just a cadaveric transplant. But at our center, we are pretty much sold on that when the graft ratio is less than 0.7, then at least 650 grams of graft liver volume helps in preventing small for size syndrome. Reconstruction of all hepatic veins, even if they do get blocked, they maintain the liver in the orthotopic position. There's been debate over portal vein modulation with splenic artery ligation, splenectomy, and today morning we heard a new thing, which is splenic vein embolization. And there's a double question mark for hemiportoceval shunt. I think most groups have stepped away from doing this. What I would like to emphasize is that even if there's a small undrained segment, this will have a greater impact on outcome, which is separate from the volume volume of the segment it drains. That means a small segment having congestion or undrained will have a bigger overall global effect on graft function. So, what are the key perioperative principles in disease donor liver transplantation? Site-to-site cavocevostomy reduces renal dysfunction. Implantation soon after hepatectomy, so the person is not anhepatic for a long time. Overcorrect coagulopathy of a post-reperfusion. Use concentrates over volume. Restrictive fluid regimen with inotropes. What about LDLT? I think one of the sort of important things has been to use a temporary portocaval shunt. Cold ischemic times can be kept very short. Graft position can be improved by diaphragmatic plication. And of course, you can minimize biliary complications. So coming to recommendations from ILTS and European Society, the first time they gave the recommendation in January 2024, and they looked at multiple randomized controlled trials and meta-analysis, and with 32 questions, 74 expert statements, and 82 international recommendations. I'll just take you through some of the important ones of their recommendation. Multimodal prehabilitation, improve patients' physiological, nutritional, and psychological reserves, exercise training for aerobic capacity, muscle mass, and strength, and nutritional supplement, and sometimes TPN may be the only way in these sick patients with a lot of ascites. The ERAS protocol is particularly suitable for LDLT donor, and that is where I think it has its greatest application. So the ideal LDLT donor should be less than 60 years of age, with a lower BMI, a graft weight more than 0.8, remnant liver volume, middle hepatic vein to be preserved in the donor, fat percentage less than 15%, and a period of low carbohydrate diet and exercise for weight loss, even if it's very modest, 2 to 3 kilograms, helpful in application of ERAS protocol. And what we know, and we all know, that the donors who are strongly motivated only should go through donation and perhaps should have a cooling off period of 2 weeks prior to donation. And I think fundamental in any sort of ERAS protocol is audit. In any surgical outcome, really, audit is the most important factor, because problems are different in different centers, and you need to sit down and find out why you're not doing as well as, say, Professor Lee in Korea. So fundamental to good outcome, in-house confidential discussion, look at the process, personnel, and procedure. So, for example, we realized early on that bile leaks were a poor outcome. So we started doing routine cholangiograms, and subsequently bile leaks in our center have decreased markedly. Similarly, we looked at middle hepatic vein reconstruction, and we initially used PTFE graft, and we found that they had a higher rate of blockage, and then we moved to venous grafts with improved patency rate. So this is just some examples of how you can do audit to solve your problems that you encounter. Now, having said a lot about ERAS, it's generally easier said than done in many cases. And I'll tell you the reasons, which are poor general condition of the recipient. There cannot be a miraculous return to normalcy if you've been very sick pre-transplantation. The operation is often technically challenging. Post-operative complications and neurological issues are often present in the recipient, vascular thrombosis and septic episodes. This is our own journey over the years, and last year we completed over 400 transplants in a single year. And survival at 1 year survival ranged above 85% at all times. Last year has been very good. So why could we not universally implement ERAS in our recipients? Less than 50% of patients were stable patients and therefore could go through the ERAS protocol. Over 20% of our recipients come from ICU for transplant. The average MEL score is more than 30. 10% of transplants are for small babies or less than 6 kgs of weight, which sometimes they take 2 to 3 weeks before they recover. And I was sort of talking to my friend, Professor Kashar, and he said that in their center also, these small babies take a long time to recover. Over 20% of our transplants are HCC, and many of them have poor performance status nowadays as they have been on immunotherapy or radioembolization or TACE and tumor embolization syndrome. But in donors, definitely it's applicable. The donor surgery is standardized, period of exercise, weight reduction helps in quick recovery, complication rates are low, and with minimally invasive donor hepatectomy, this is likely to improve further. Something that we've not managed to deal well after major hepatectomy is nausea, and there's something that we are still not overcome. So this is our technique of minimally invasive donor hepatectomy at our center. Full robotic liver mobilization, portal dissection. The robotic ports are changed to laparoscopic port for parenchymal transection, and the robot is docked again for bile duct division. So the graft is removed by 12 centimeter incision after dividing blood vessels. It replicates the open procedure, no warm ischemia, cost effective. You don't need expensive staplers. And we've done this so in 453 cases between 2020 and 24. The operating time was 420 minutes, no donor mortality, conversion to open technique 11 cases, 3 donors had bile leaks, recipient biliary complication 9.3%, and all donors were given the option of choosing Fanon style versus midline, but only 11 chose Fanon style because with the Fanon style incision there was an extra cost of $1,200 US. Coming to the steps of ERAS protocol, pre-transplant counseling and nutrition. I think here, if the recipient and particularly the donors, they must be explained the procedure in detail and made to meet those who were previously operated upon, including those who went through the procedure 3 weeks ago, as well as those who are long-term out. So actually, most of the donors are more concerned not about the short-term events, but they want to know what's going to happen in the long term. For the donors, this is very reassuring. The recipients are placed on a high-protein diet with salt restriction, and sick recipients, I said earlier, may need total parenteral nutrition. So the ERAS, particularly in small babies, is very important. And our pediatric less than 6 kg babies are extubated on the table when we published this paper. Medial reduction allows for lax abdominal closure. We published this in 2012. Adults extubated next day, and on the second post-operative, all lines and arterial lines are removed. The given oral fluids, ad lib, and Cooley's catheter is replaced by a convenient drainage. Early drain removal is important, even if the amount is high. And if there's accumulation of ascites, our IR person, the intensive care person will place it again. Now, about albumin infusion has often been recommended as key to quick recovery. However, it may be a double-edged sword. The infused albumin seeps out of the circulation, holds fluid in the extravascular compartment, may actually come in way of the ERAS protocol. And the jury is still out on the routine use of albumin in the perioperative period. One thing is for sure, though, that low serum albumins may increase CNI toxicity, so you may need to have a lower tacrolimus or cyclosporine levels. What about ERAS and renal failure? We have a lot of patients now who have renal impairment. And one thing that we learned early on is that CRRT will be needed in the early post-operative period. However, it comes in the way of early mobilization. So as soon as they're stable, these patients should undergo intermittent dialysis. And the biochemical parameters are ignored if there's good urine output, because eventually the kidney, many of these kidneys will recover post-operatively. Low dose CNI is preferred. What about ERAS in patients in encephalopathy? There's another group which do many patients now with ACLF3. We end up transplanting them even if they are in encephalopathy. Many of these patients require early tracheostomy. We avoid sodium shifts to prevent demyelination, non-opioid analgesics, and cyclosporine may be preferable over tacrolimus. So when to transplant? Obviously, many groups have used MEL score, And I think if the MELD is greater than 25, then they should have a transplant. Now, coming to the sort of a rather controversial part of our, because many of us transplant now for ACLF3. Ideally, if we could reverse organ failure and then go ahead with transplant, the results would be as you would expect in liver transplant for chronic liver disease. What about transplant for those in ACLF3 who do not improve? And the paper from Asan Medical Center in LDLT, which shows that when the MELD is greater than 25, outcomes in ACLF is poor. So, in fact, some groups have actually said that ACLF3 should be prioritized as even if the MELD scores were lower. Now, within our own country, there's this controversial data. There's data to suggest that ACLF3 transplantation, living donor liver transplantation, gives equivalent results. But the two groups, one from south of India, Hyderabad, whereas ACLF2 was approximate 80% survival. These are patients who went into transplantation with ACLF, not those who recovered and then went on to have a transplant. And when we published our own data, which showed 70% survival for ACLF3, we have quite criticized. But these are patients, so looking at the Hyderabad group, which is in South India, that 71 patients and 87 of these patients were in ACLF2. But even in this very sick group of patients, they had over 80% survival. And if you carried on with medical management plasma exchange, your cost was much more. At our own center, we looked at our ACLF database between February 2017 to 21 and compared outcomes between ACLF and with chronic liver disease. These are patients whom we could not improve, and if we didn't transplant them, they would have been dead in a week's time. So we had 54 patients with ACLF3 at the time of going to transplant. The patients were younger, heavier, higher MELD score, and less likely to have HCC. Most of them, of course, were from alcoholic liver disease. And even in this very sick group of patients, we had over 70% 1-year survival. But the caveat, and I saw that in another presentation from Korea, we saw that patients who were in respiratory failure did poorly as compared to those who were not in respiratory failure, or if they needed prolonged ventilation. Of course, younger donors did better. So overall, not very good, but generally in these sick categories, even a 70% 1-year survival is not bad. So what about ERAS and liver transplanted at our own center? Nutrition has been a key in these sick recipients. Try and extubate within 12 hours. If not, then they'll end up with a tracheostomy, out of bed, oral feeding, drains removed irrespective amount, and stop antibiotics on day 5. So in the end, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to conclude that there are 3 main components on which ERAS established as evidence-based perioperative care process, multimodal and multi-professional teamwork, and a result of continuous audit. The development of ERAS pathways have highlighted the importance of perioperative care because it has the ability to achieve a reduced hospital stay, patient satisfaction, and reduced rate of complications. The guidelines for perioperative surgery of liver surgery, best available evidence, and we should try and see whether we can apply this in the sicker patients that we transplant nowadays. Thank you very much for your attention.